Welcome to Founders Day 2020. This is where we honor our founders, Eckley and Sophia Coxe, who have made sure that MMI is here to serve the local community since 1879. I've asked a few people to speak today to help honor our founders. That's Father John Wagner from St. James Episcopal Church and Mr. Joe Radowski, President Emeritus, who served our school as president from 1973 to 2001. So to give you some historical perspective that might geographically make sense is, when he started as head of school and as a math teacher, Old Main was the only building in addition to the gymnasium, which was across the street. When he left office in 2001, all of the current building was there except for the library. So he's seen a remarkable amount of change and can give us a great historical perspective on MMI. And as the best historian of the Coxe family I know, a lot of perspective on our founders.
It's been about 2 decades since I've been asked to speak formally about the Coxes. So if my memory is a little cloudy, I apologize ahead of time. But I'm assuming that all of you as seniors and adults probably are experts on Eckley and Sophia. Because we used, in the old days, we many times had a variety of programs where we focused on them. And I think that by the time most of our seniors were graduated, they knew an awful lot about both Eckley and Sophia. But I thought it might be interesting to look and see how and why the Coxes of England came to Drifton, Pennsylvania. The Coxes are a very interesting family, and there are a lot of characters in the family, and we're not even going to try to come close to talking about many of them. But let's do an abridged version as to how they went from there to here. The first Coxe that in England that we know of is William Coxe, who in 1575 married Dorothy Wall. Now that goes back a little ways. We're going to jump a little forward to his son, Dr. Daniel Coxe, and you're going to see that when you study Coxe family history, if you're ever so inclined, they repeat the names quite often. So there are quite a few Daniels. But Dr. Daniel Coxe was actually the physician to King Charles II and his wife, Queen Anne. He was not only a physician, but he was also a land speculator. And he ended up buying quite a few land grants in the New World, primarily in the New Jersey area. Although for a while, he was speculating on the Carolinas. And picture buying land grants, and the land grant he was buying went from the 31st latitude to the 36th latitude, and it was kind of wide. It kind of stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. He eventually dropped that and he focused on New Jersey. He never came to America, but his son, Colonel Daniel Coxe, did come. And in fact, in 1701, ended up going into New Jersey, eventually becoming the governor of New Jersey, and again expanded the family's land holdings, etc. He ended up marrying a woman by the name of Sarah Eckley. Now again, you're going to find that in the Coxe family, an awful lot of the mother's surnames become first names of some of the children. They in turn had a number of children, but their grandson is the next one we focus on. And he was Tench Coxe. Tench Coxe was a very successful businessman in Philadelphia. But unfortunately, with the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, he ended up being a loyalist. In fact, when the British took over Philadelphia and General Howe was coming to take possession and establish his headquarters there. It was Tench Coxe and a group of his friends who rode out to greet him and bring him back in. Now eventually, with the end of the war, he became a very loyal American. He was very instrumental in helping the new country expand. In fact, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under Alexander Hamilton. He probably would have even been in a higher position had he not proven himself to be initially dubious about how this new country was going to fare. He was not only a Philadelphia businessman, but he was also very involved in inventions and in different prospects. He was credited and is credited with establishing cotton as a cash crop. In fact, he sent some of his children south to raise cotton. But the other thing that he also recognized was that anthracite coal was probably going to be the fuel of the future. And he started buying up land grants in this area. At one time, the family owned somewhere around 80,000 acres of land in Luzerne, Lackawanna, Schuylkill counties. He did, however, bankrupt the family. By the time he passed on, the family had to pretty much start selling land in order to pay for the taxes, etc. His son, Judge Charles Coxe, was basically given the responsibility to take care of the legacy that he was passing on. And he instructed him, of all places that he might have to sell, not to sell the coal land. And now we have the Coxes coming into this area, because then his son, Eckley Coxe, named after his grandmother, was sent to the University of Pennsylvania, graduated from there at the age of 19, went on to the École School of Mines in France, and then studied under Professor Weissbach in Germany, the guru of mining. When he returned in about the 1860s, he came into this area, and by that time, the Coxes had leased some of the land in the area to other individuals, and there was a mining operation, very strong one going on in the village of Eckley. Now, Eckley received its name from Judge Charles Coxe, who named the area after his son, who was being groomed to take care of the mining interests. So now we have Eckley coming into the area, buying back the leases of the different operators that were already mining in the area, and now taking over. And from here, I'll give you a little bit of a virtual tour. We'll kind of take a run through Freeland, and I'll point out some of the areas where there are still monuments that basically are to the generosity of the Coxes, and some of the areas where there were other operations going on which no longer exist. So we have Eckley, and Eckley is the larger village before Drifton started taking over. In fact, the predecessor to St. James Church was in the village of Eckley. The first, as far as I know, Episcopalian service was held in 1855 in the village of Eckley, in the school there, because there was no church. Eventually a church was built. Unfortunately, it was destroyed. But if you go to Eckley now, you'll find another Episcopal church there that was the twin to the church that was there. They actually picked up the entire church. It was at that point serving the Whitehaven area, brought it here, and now that is its replacement. Eventually, in about 1883, this church was built. And to no small degree, that was largely due to Sophia Coxe. So if we leave the village of Eckley and on our virtual tour come on the, let's say, Jetto Highland Road until we get to 940, and we make a very sharp right to come in our direction, the first home that you see right there on the right, it's a little bit in a hollow there, is what was at one time a hospital. Again, the Coxes were very concerned about their own people and people in general, but they knew that there would be, again, people being injured in the mines, so they built a hospital right here. Now, if you look at it, it's now a private home, but it was at one time, when I first came to the area, it was extended quite a bit back into the hollow. Now it's been converted, quite a bit of it was cut back. As we continue down 940, the first home after that we see on the left has two big stone pillars. That was the doctor's home. And that right now is owned by Scott Miller, an alum, I think, of the class of '79. So coming on down 940, we do get to St. James Church, and it's a gorgeous church inside. It's patterned after a English country church. And if you go inside, one of the treasures that you will see is there is actually a Tiffany window in this church. Father John served at St. Mary's in Jim Thorpe. They had quite a few Tiffany windows there. This church has one in memory of it again, a Daniel Coxe, but another generation. There's also a pew there with a very small plaque, and that indicates where Mrs. Coxe used to sit. That was her pew. The other thing, that this whole area has changed dramatically. At one time, there was another building right here, and that was the Sunday school. And Mrs. Coxe was not a person that delegated. She believed in being involved. So she actually taught Sunday school here. And another building that is very significant to all of us who are connected with MMI was across the street, Cross Creek Hall. It was built originally as a place for entertainment, gatherings of the people, but also in the lower level, there was a laboratory, several rooms, and a reading room, AKA a library. Why is that building important to us? Because that's where the first MMI began, there in Cross Creek Hall. And the first principal of the school was a gentleman by the name of Oswald X. Xavier Heinrich, who came up from Richmond to start the school, to continue the school, and did an amazing job in setting up its curriculum and so forth. In 1879, 11 students graduated, and those students were all employees of the Coxe Brothers Coal Company. So as we go up the road and around, there were several buildings that no longer exist that were summer homes for some of the Coxes. But as we go, and we'll come back to the main home in just a bit, as we go around the curve, just before we get to Colello's, there was an open space that comes down again towards the south. That was actually a gangway because there was a huge breaker right here. No longer exists. So as we continue on, a little further up the road, there's now a great big open space. Those were the Drifton shops, huge buildings that the Coxes built. Eckley was a very resilient man. The problem with coal in this area was that there was a lot of it, but you couldn't sell it because you could basically pick it up for free. So the coal had to be transported to New York or Philadelphia or wherever, and the people that owned the railroads decided they were going to take advantage of that. So they started upping the amount of fare that they were going to charge to ship the coal to these sites. And basically, in doing so, they would bankrupt the coal companies and they would make all the money. Well, that wasn't going to happen under Eckley's watch. So he started the DS&S, the Delaware, the Susquehanna, and the Schuylkill. He started his own railroad. And the drifting shops were where the locomotives and the cars and everything were being built. Eventually, the railroad companies realized they weren't going to win this game, so they came up with a solution to make money and also allow the coal companies to also make some money. So as we go around the curve and get into Freeland itself, we're going to go all the way up to Main Street. And if you're driving up Main Street and if you looked to the right, or if you look now, you see the park. Actually, that park was donated by Eckley and Sophia, 2 acres of land, a beautiful wooded area. Eventually, the town fathers, etc., having different needs in the town, sold off, and now we have about 3 acres there. But as we move further up on Center Street, we get to Walnut Street. If you could make a left there, but unfortunately it would be the wrong way. But a little ways up at about 921, there is Saints Peter and Paul. And I think the full title is Eastern Greek Catholic Church. The manse to that church is what used to be called first the Industrial School for Girls, and then it was called the Girls Loyalty Society, because that was MMI's sister school. I don't know how many people realize that we had a sister school. So Mrs. Coxe started that for the girls. Unfortunately, that didn't last, and eventually that closed down. As we turn and we come back this way, and we get, let's say, to St. Anne's Road, and we come out St. Anne's Road, we come to another home that still exists in the woods, and that is Windy Hill. Windy Hill was actually built by Eckley Coxe Jr., not a son, but a nephew to Eckley, because Eckley and Sophia had no children. Very interesting place. If those of you that go to Penn or wherever, and if you go to their museum, you'll find that Eckley Jr. had an awful lot to do with the University of Pennsylvania. He pretty much single-handedly paid for their archaeological digs in Egypt and Nubia, and now if you go there, you'll find a tremendous collection. That was his home. He died young, however, and then it was purchased by the Youngs. The Young, Charles Morris Young, was a famous artist, but by the same token, he ended up marrying into the Coxe family. Very interesting area. They were experimenting with solar furnaces and so forth. All that is there. As we come back down the road, we pass the Coxe home, which you are probably familiar with. Between the Coxe home and here, we have a stripping. During Mrs. Coxe's day, that was not done. That was a meadow. And this is where Mrs. Coxe would have all of the 4th of July parties, etc. Across the street was where she would have her Christmas parties. And in that way, she kept very close to her people, to her primary interest of children, and continued to benefit this entire area. But I think with all of that, it gives you a couple of places that you could stop by and visit. I'm sure that you'll want to research more facts about them if you are not by this time totally saturated. But again, I hope you and your families have a tremendous Thanksgiving, a very beautiful Christmas, and also a wonderful New Year. I thank you all for inviting me.